I'm going to attempt to glue everything together today, but that will only be possible with your input. Carolyn said it is going to be an interactive session, and I think that's how you're going to get the most out of this. I can stand here and preach, I can tell you about maximising volunteer involvement, but it's your engagement as well that will make this most effective and why you gave up your valuable time this morning. So thank you for doing that. I've got the clock up here to keep me on time, heaven forbid. So, in terms of why I'm here and maximising volunteer involvement in the tourism industry, I just want to highlight, first and foremost, the organisation that I'm speaking on behalf of. Volunteer Now, we work to promote, enhance and support volunteering across Northern Ireland. We are about connecting with individuals and organisations to build healthy communities and build positive change. So what does that actually mean? Okay, a number of areas that we work across is in terms of supporting volunteers to find opportunities. So I had the pleasure of walking around some of the tables this morning prior to starting, and some of the issues were coming up in terms of we don't actually know where to promote or we don't know where to find. Okay, so we support volunteers to find volunteering opportunities. At the moment, I looked up the website this morning and we have over 2,700 opportunities listed on the website. So the opportunities are there and the volunteers in turn are wanting to find those opportunities. We also influence policy in relation to volunteering. We have had the first ever volunteer strategy for Northern Ireland launched in June of this year. The first time that volunteering has been on government's agenda, and we're absolutely delighted that now we can champion it, which we've been doing for many years, but now we can champion it at that level where the executive has to take account of what's going on. We provide training and information, speaking to a couple at the back who have just recently been on one of our training courses and have been able to implement some of the best practice from that. And what I'd also say then, that leads on to national quality assurances in terms of standards which are in place for volunteering. The big daddy one being investing in volunteers, which some organisations can embark on, and we've recently just had 2 new organisations have gained that. One from a sports perspective, which is the first ever UK-wide, so we're delighted with that. That comes under my project as well, so I'm very pleased with part of that too. We also engage in promotional campaigns, so I think it was down at the back, Wright was saying about some of that promotional side of things. The 1st to the 7th of June every year is National Volunteers Week. That's across the whole of the UK, England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And this year in particular, that will be during the torch relay when it's here in Northern Ireland on the 3rd to the 7th of June. So the 1st to the 7th is when National Volunteers Week is on, and that gives you the opportunity to engage either with your existing volunteers, to promote them, to recognise them, or to see what opportunities you have to come up. Said here about thinking of volunteer involvement. How can you be innovative? How can you be creative around what you can offer volunteers, and in turn then what they can offer you? Okay. And what I would also say is then I work on our 2012 project, which is just one element of Volunteer Now. The project is very diverse in terms of what areas it takes you to. One in particular we focus on is the 2012 Games Time, and they call them Games Makers. And what I would say about that is we're limited in terms of what we could provide because they're actually recruited by London 2012, the London Organising Committee Olympic Games, so that's LOCOG. So what we did was we promoted the opportunity to ensure that Northern Ireland is actually on that platform on the world stage of showcasing not only their volunteering but also being a Northern Ireland representative, which I think is so important in terms of bringing back and highlighting their experience and what we can bring to it also from a tourism perspective. So we had 2,000 applications, went to LOCOG from Northern Ireland applicants. They were meant to go over to London for an interview, and we saw this as a massive barrier to participation. We lobbied hard and were successful in this lobbying. I won't say we're successful in all of them, but we were successful in this lobbying in terms of the interviews actually took place in Belfast, which we were delighted at because that enabled people to actually go to the interview without an expense, which they may not even then get a Games Maker role. So around 1,000 people were invited to interview, and now LOCOG are in the process of informing those people who are being offered a role. There is an expectation from London 2012 that they will pay for their own travel and their own accommodation. Again, we see this as a major barrier So we have actually partnered with DCAL to put together a bursary scheme alongside a number of public and private sector partners. And this is to support those who it may be a financial barrier to actually becoming involved with the Games. And these are things that we want to do, and that's stuff which I'll go through today in terms of taking down those barriers, because we certainly didn't want London 2012, the people from Northern Ireland who were going across were only those who could afford to go across. We also then, the 2012 side of things, the Games time, that's only a small part of what this project is about. A large part of it is about leaving a lasting legacy here in Northern Ireland for volunteering inspired by 2012. That's part of why I'm here today. Okay, and other elements that include within that are supporting young people, promoting them and recognising their volunteering within the sports and the arts side of things. We have older people's projects. Then we also have creating volunteering champions, which is not only about showcasing our high-profile volunteers. So I know we've got a few North Coast people. We'll know Alan Campbell and Richard Chambers well, two of our volunteer champions. They're not only talking the talk, but they're walking the walk, okay, because they are our volunteers as well. Okay, they come back and they champion volunteering here at this local level. And we also then dip the toe for other people into volunteer management, making them volunteer champions within their organisations, going back into the grassroots and making a difference. We also have an event management for volunteers course, which is partnered with the University of Ulster. And this is showcasing what is going on in volunteering within events and what can you learn across from the child protection to the conflict management to effective communication to stewarding to health and safety to fire awareness. A whole breadth of modules within a 2-day learning, and actually the next course of that is coming up this weekend at the University of Ulster in Jordanstown. And the hope for that is to establish a diverse pool of volunteers so that whenever we do have events coming to Northern Ireland, we're not re-recruiting, but it's actually looking at that diverse skill of pooled volunteers and seeing how they can engage most proactively with the opportunities that are upcoming. So in terms of today, I'm most certainly delighted with the calibre of case studies, first and foremost, no pressure, that we have. We've worked closely with the organisations presenting and hope they provide an opportunity to give you a flavour of just how you can benefit from volunteer involvement. And alongside those informative and thought-provoking case studies, I will aim to create an awareness of the importance of volunteering good practice in the tourism industry. By the end of this session, you will, it says should, you will be able to list the key concepts of volunteering. You will be able to outline the legal context of volunteer involvement, and you will be able to identify the steps involved in the effective recruitment of volunteers. This year is the Year of Opportunity. It's also the European Year of Volunteering. 2012 holds so many unique and potential opportunities for you to engage with volunteering or to enhance what you're already doing across volunteering. And we're not only thinking 2011, 2012, what's 2013 about? Okay, I'm delighted that we've got representation not only from 2013 World Police and Fire Games, but also alongside the 2013 City of Culture. Okay, so many opportunities there. Is your organisation near one of those areas? Can you jump on a theme? I know certainly from the events perspective, looking at that Titanic year, looking at our giants, can you be a giant in terms of volunteer involvement? Okay, so we welcome teasing out some of those opportunities, because what I'm going to talk about in terms of good practice, it can enable you to maximise a resource, in this case volunteering, in a mutually beneficial way. So this session will help you consider how you currently or in the future involve volunteers. As I said, it will be interactive. So I welcome that engagement and welcome you giving your valuable time. So please do take that opportunity. And no doubt you're sitting with like-minded people beside you. We might switch a few of those tables around so there's people that you're working with as we go along that you don't actually know, and maybe glean some of their experiences in moving forward. I think it's worth putting a bit of context around where we are with volunteering in Northern Ireland. Some of these stats are taken from It's All About Time, which was the last major piece of research carried out for volunteering in Northern Ireland, usually carried out every 5 years. So we're hoping that next year will be another opportunity to update this. But the stats for this are taken from It's All About Time in 2007, that we have over 250,000 people involved in formal volunteering. And when I say formal volunteering, I mean under the auspices of an organisation. We've actually just got under 500,000 involved in informal volunteering, so often that's at a neighbourhood level outside of their own family. The second most common type of voluntary activity is helping to organise or run an activity or an event. Most notably, they are affected by tourism. They are driven almost by tourism as well. So you do have a carrot there, which volunteers want. How are you going to get that? Okay, where are you going to meet in the middle to ensure that actually, if it's the second most common type of activity that they want to be involved with and that they are involved with, how can you ensure then that you can marry those two? And also then from an employer-supported volunteering perspective, because I know there's some businesses here today, and I just want to highlight that we have really driven this forward in the last 6 months as a key objective within Volunteer Now. So since June of this year, we have engaged with over 250 employees across employer-supported volunteering. They have been across a number of private and public sectors, for example, Ulster Bank, DSD, DRD, Botanic Inns, HMRC, a wide variety, and some of the opportunities that they have engaged with can be from the likes of the National Trust, the hospices, Colin Glen, and the conservation volunteers. So many, many opportunities. So let's start at the very beginning. What is volunteering? Sounds like an obvious question, sounds like I know the answer to that, but actually what is it? Okay, this is the definition of volunteering in Northern Ireland. It was taken from the Join In, Get Involved, Build a Better Future, that first volunteering strategy for Northern Ireland, which I discussed. And I'd just like to go through it in terms of volunteering. It's a commitment of time and energy for the benefit of society and the community, the environment or individuals outside or in addition to one's immediate family. It is unpaid and undertaken freely and by choice. Okay, so when I started out with our objectives, I said that we were going to outline the 3 key concepts of volunteering. The definition of volunteering is your first key concept. Okay, and why would we define volunteering? It's important to define volunteering for many reasons, but in particular, to ensure that we know who the good practice, the policies, the procedures apply to. And secondly, to ensure that there's a clear definition between a job and a volunteer role. Okay, to ensure that that line, that we have made a clear distinction between those two. I spoke earlier with a couple of tables around your motivations for being here today, because I wanted to hear about that. The scones came high on the agenda, the lunch came second high on the agenda, but then what came in was actually I want to make a difference. I want to know how to make a difference, or I want to enhance what I'm doing, or I want to engage in this area that I haven't engaged with before. Okay, so firstly I welcome the honesty. Second, I was delighted with the responses when people actually thought about it. Because with volunteering, it's so important you know people's reasons for getting involved. These are taken from the It's All About Time piece of research. And if you know why someone is motivated and their reason for being involved with your organisation, you can involve them effectively, maximise the experience for both, and hopefully look at the retention, which was touched on by a few people as well. These are very important actually when you are looking how to find volunteers. You could frame your recruitment around this. What I would highlight is that we have here, I should be doing this with the clicker, but since it's right beside me, helps me to get on in my career and chance to get a recognised qualification. I would highlight the research was 07. It was before we had the recession, before we were in this current economic climate. Not to predict what would be in the next piece of research, but we are finding from talking to a lot of volunteers that actually some of those motivations in terms of young people coming out of education or older people wanting to retrain, okay, often those motivations are slightly higher. So is there something you can offer? I know down here we're talking about the skills development, which was fantastic to hear about. What can you offer that maybe gives those people that opportunity? Do you have a need in the community? Okay, can you offer people the chance to meet? Okay, because often people are isolated. Volunteering gives them the opportunity to meet and to socialise. Carolyn has touched on this earlier, but alongside those motivations, I just welcome, just for me to get a clear mind, who currently, outside of their job, volunteers? here in the audience? Okay, brilliant. And who within their job then has something to do with a volunteer involvement or a volunteer programme? And is anyone here engaged with employer-supported volunteering? Okay, good. Okay, I will make sure I pitch the rest of this accordingly then. That's great. So just to note, we know why people may get involved then, what their motivations are. It's important to know then, why aren't they getting involved? Okay, because 17.5 people, I'm not sure where the half came, but in terms of percentages, are not involved because they actually would be willing to do something, but they weren't asked. Okay, so how are we not engaging with those people? Where are we breaking down those barriers? So these are some of the reasons for not becoming involved in volunteering in Northern Ireland. These can be barriers or obstacles, and what I did say was that I'm going to make this interactive. So before we go to the next slide, we're going to have 3 volunteers who are going to highlight these barriers, maybe pick one of them and say how they as an organisation could break, or they as an individual or a programme manager, how they could break down one of those barriers. Okay, so do we have anyone in the audience who maybe is potentially putting one of those barriers up without even realising it, and now thinking about it, is thinking how they could take that barrier down? Okay, so no pressure, but we don't move on, and you don't get Anne's case study, nor the scones, until I actually have 3 people highlight how those 3 of those barriers within the 12 or so that's there could be broken down. Any show of hands? Not to put any pressure on, but I think this table was thinking of involving volunteers. Is there anything up there that you think, goodness, we hadn't thought of that before, and there's something there we could put out in our literature or ensure we inform to make sure that we don't put it as a barrier or an obstacle to volunteer involvement? The rest of the day gets more interactive, by the way, so you are going to have to engage at this stage, and I promise you I can be very stubborn, so I will not move on until I have 3 people. Jared, thank you.
Jared McCauley from the Northwest 200. I think the obvious one that jumps out for me there is haven't heard about the opportunities. I think I'm fairly new, but certainly a lot of the volunteering element came from within the Coleraine District Motor Club. And I very much got the impression that people are not aware of how they can become involved in the event. And it's certainly that whole communication and PR side of getting people involved that we're working on now to try and build a succession plan. Because we're suffering probably with the same issues of a number of events, that our existing core volunteers are all getting older, and how do we replace them? So I think probably at the bottom of it, the communication, the opportunities are there.
Okay. So, haven't heard about opportunities to give help. How many of us often ask them, I hadn't heard of that? Yeah, I'd welcome that. Okay, so if people haven't heard of your message, your opportunity, your chance to involve, of course it's going to be a barrier. Okay, so that's delighted that you've actually looked at that, seen that that is a barrier, and addressing it through your communications. Okay, excellent. Yes?
Yeah, we have the same thing with RSP. They haven't got the right skills or experience to be able to help. People often think that you need to be an expert to volunteer for RSPB. So we'd always put in any of the roles that we put out there, make sure that people know that, there's training, but also you don't have to be an expert. It's just about engaging people and, getting involved.
Fantastic. So, haven't got the right skills or experience to help. 1, do you need them? Okay, perhaps not. Perhaps the perception is. And secondly, if you do need them, is the training, support and development offered? Okay, so breaking down the barriers twofold. And that's something you're currently doing in terms of some of your illustrations as well.
In all the adverts that we put out there, we would always say you don't need to be an expert. It's just about getting involved, and you can learn on the job and you get training.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Okay, pressure's on because those were 2 good ones. One more, please. Yes? Yeah.
You think of the building industry as being young people, but
And there is that perception, absolutely. It's sort of like, oh, young people are engaging in volunteering because it's perhaps a pathway to employment. But actually, we're living in an older society. Older people have so much to offer. And we actually have a programme around 50 plus. 50 plus doesn't sound very old, but actually that's often when people are nearing that retirement age, and that's when you see a level of engagement. Because if people have been around that 65 plus, it's harder for them to engage. So if you get people of that 50 plus, it's really, really easy then to engage with them across many of your types of volunteering. So that perception that you're too old. So are you, whenever you're putting posters out there around your volunteer recruitment, are you putting them all of young people? Because then how's an older person? They're just going, no, that's nothing to do with me. So that's something to think about, is that actually, yes, the opportunities are, you're never too old, from that key message, the strapline, but also through some of your images. Okay, make sure you show that diversity, because then people feel it's open to them in terms of those options. Thank you ever so much for that. Couple at the back, Tim Craig knows this slide well and knows that it's my favourite slide in the world, and that I'm a geek about this. But what I would say is this is the second key concept of volunteering, and this is the two-way relationship, just not what you as an organisation get, but what does the volunteer get. If this is in place, this is how you will have retention of volunteers. Okay, so firstly, what does your volunteer bring to the organisation? Okay, by involving volunteers, what do they bring? They bring enthusiasm, they bring time, they bring credibility, they bring experience, they bring ideas. Okay, often that think tank can be vital in terms of some of your programmes which you develop. What the organisation gains then through this is the community involvement, the diversity, the dedication, the flexibility, and the expertise. What the organisation gives back to the volunteers, some of which we're touching on today, that good practice in terms of that information, the clear roles, the management. Insurance often can be as simple as that, people knowing those, the support, potentially the training. And finally then, what the volunteer gains. They gain a lot of fun, and I think we'll get that in some pieces of reviews that we've carried out for volunteer involvement, but they get the recognition, the learning, the experience, they often get friendships, which I think quite a few in the audience would have made friendships through their volunteering. I know I have. So this two-way relationship, it's only if this takes place that you can be ensured that you involve volunteers and you don't use volunteers. And there's big a difference there. So think whenever you're embarking on your volunteer programme, we just want to use volunteers. Okay, I want you to think about that, because no, it's actually about involving volunteers, bringing them along on your journey to either deliver your message, to be your face, to be your ambassador, or to actually ensure that you run as an organisation. Okay, so that then will lead to your retention. What I'd also say is it's important to be able to measure then what that impact is. And at Volunteer Now we run, there's a volunteer impact assessment toolkit, which is UK-wide, and that's about measuring your volunteer involvement from a qualitative and a quantitative perspective. So when you're going potentially for funding, do you know for what resources you put into funding what you get back? This tool enables you to do that. We actually run a number of workshops throughout the year in this, but we do have one upcoming this Thursday, which may be something that you wish to engage with. It's a workshop that takes place from 10 to 3:30, but the toolkit that it offers you as an organisation is to take away and put into practice around what your programme's about, quantifying and qualifying in terms of where that volunteer involvement and the resources have gone towards, and that's something that I would recommend people to do. So, we've had our first key concept, which is our definition of volunteering. We've had our second key concept, which is in terms of the two-way relationship and ensuring we're involving and not using. I'd like to highlight our third. This is the third key principle that underpins volunteer management in terms of the unique contribution. This is the unique contribution that volunteers have to make to businesses and organisations, have to make to communities, which are the lifeblood often within the event side of things, and the development and delivery of tourism in Northern Ireland. So I just want to showcase that actually they're different but complementary in terms of volunteer roles and a job. Okay, their aim is the same, for example, delivery of a successful event, but their role and their jobs are very different. So, just give a recent example. In August of this year was the British Transplant Games. There were some 80 volunteers involved, and we not only promoted the opportunity across Northern Ireland, but we were delighted with the diverse range of volunteers that were involved, with 40% being new to volunteering, which often it can be a lower stat because often you're re-recruiting the same people. So in terms of the different but complementary, we had 7 different roles across 26 different sites. One of the roles was meet and greet at Belfast City Airport. Okay, a real chance to engage from that tourism perspective, to be that first face of the Games. The Games, they recruited a small event management team. Okay, it was known that that event management team could not get round every athlete, every spectator and every member of the Games family. But what was recognised was that volunteer involvement could enable this, could be the face of the Games, could be the ambassador of Northern Ireland, and that's why the meet and greet role was put in place. The meet and greet role was at Belfast City Airport. We were delighted with the engagement from the airport. They offered them a prime position so that whenever those passengers came off the plane, set foot in Northern Ireland, they were greeted by volunteers. Very visually, those people knew that they were going to be engaging with a Games time volunteer. They engaged at the level of, 1, welcoming them. Welcome to Northern Ireland. They informed them in terms of if they'd arrived on the Games day or if they'd arrived the day before, informed them of what the programme of activity was. And then they further provided them with information in terms of what is Northern Ireland about. What would they recommend? The questions were, I've got a day free, what would you recommend? Or I've heard about this, tell me a bit more. We provided training to those volunteers so that they felt adept to be able to answer those questions. We also provided support so that if they felt there was anything that they couldn't answer, there was a support mechanism in place for them to be able to go to. Okay, so that 1, the volunteer was very, very much able to go out there and be that face of British Transplant Games, but secondly, that they felt supportive in terms of their knowledge of the Games and of Northern Ireland. This role then enabled the event management company, who had the same aim, the successful delivery of the Games. This actually enabled them to do their job. It enabled athletes to go to registration, which is where they had to register for their events. It enabled their athletes' families to go to the hotels, where there were certain packs there for them to pick up, okay, which the event management company had arranged. And thirdly, it enabled any dignitaries to ensure that their transport was provided, and they then met up with the event management team to take forward their timetable for the rest of their visit. Okay, so very, very different roles and jobs, but complementary in terms of their aim being the same. What I would also highlight from that is that we carried out a review of the British Transplant Games volunteer involvement, because I think it's very, very important, not only from the impact assessment toolkit, which I talked about, but to review as you go along, to be hot off the press whenever those people are thinking of their engagement. We carried out a review, as I say, some 40% were new to volunteering, 97% would volunteer again. Okay, 100% felt managed and supported, and 100% of 80 volunteers, 100% said they would recommend volunteering to a friend. Okay, so if you have effective volunteer management in place, you will retain your volunteers. Okay, and that was proof in terms of the British Transplant Games, and we've already had a level of engagement with other volunteers now, and they're embarking on different opportunities across Northern Ireland. We're going to move on to an exercise after Anne's session. You'll be delighted to hear you've heard enough from me. And it is looking about why you involve volunteers. And I want to give you some thought. What I would say after Anne's session is, when you come back from the coffee, or come back, don't sit at the same table. Okay? Or sit at the same table, but sit with different people. Okay, if you're from the same organisation, sit differently, because you'll actually come back maybe with different perspectives. Okay, and it's important to bring that learning together for you as organisations, because we're going to think about why you involve volunteers. What's your ethos? Do you put in place the two-way relationship? Have you thought of that unique contribution? Okay, this could almost be your strap line, and that's what we're going to go through. I can highlight in the next slide what some other people's reasons have been, but I don't want to give anything away. So what I will do is I'll hold on that slide Sorry, Jamie, if this messes up the running order. But I'll hold on this slide because I actually want to get your perspective and your feedback on where we're going to take this morning. And through Anne's actually case study, may get you thinking of other areas that you hadn't previously thought of as well. So just before I do hand over to Anne, I'd just like to recap on those three principles that underpin volunteer management. One, the definition of volunteering, who we're talking about, okay, and what it is about in terms of undertaking freely and without financial gain. Secondly, our two-way relationship, to ensure that we're involving and not using. And thirdly, our unique contribution. Okay, somebody asked me in terms of, do you get people saying, but volunteers are taking jobs? No, not if you have got clear rules in place and a clear distinction between what is a job and what is a volunteer role. If you have that in place, then know you have every backup in terms of why you involve volunteers, to ensure that it's clear but distinct in terms of what they can offer. So, without further ado, I think I'm on time. I would like to hand over to Anne. Anne is engaged with Volunteer now, in not only what is a very busy time for the MAC, but also recognise that we need to think of volunteer involvement at this early stage. So we're delighted from that perspective. She's Chief Executive of the MAC. Without further ado, hand over